So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Pawliw-Fry. I listened to your podcast this morning and love that you walk on the podcast. I think it's such a necessity right now to get people moving. And of course, a walking meditation is to me like the ideal answer, perfect for the times we're in. As a thought leader, we'll talk more about the podcast, but right now, as a thought leader on emotional intelligence, I wanted to ask you what you see as the distinction between mindfulness and EI.
Oh, wow. Great. Do we have an hour?
Sure.
Yeah. So to me, they are absolutely complementary. Um, and almost depending on which way you come in, if you come in more from an EI perspective, mindfulness can be looked on as a tool to help you grow your emotional intelligence. But the truth is that if you come to this from a mindfulness perspective, then that's almost the bigger umbrella, and emotional intelligence is a tool. So I can argue both ways. And because I have experience in both sides, I'm not fussed, but absolutely, mindfulness can help us grow self-awareness. Mindfulness is something you can develop that helps you manage emotions. So it absolutely can be used for EI. But of course, as you know, mindfulness is not just a technique. It's much bigger than that. And depending on how you want to frame it more, verging on more of a spiritual meaning-based approach versus more technical science approach. So, I don't know if that's helpful, but they fit so well together.
No, I agree with that. And I just think some people get confused. And so that's really why I wanted your opinion about it. So
For
I
sure.
appreciate that.
For sure.
So, here between the podcast and the workshops we do and the trainings, we've been really focusing on trying to support people in shifting from reacting to external events to learning to better manage their own responses to
Mm.
events because we can't control what's happening out there. And so I was wondering if you have any suggestions for how people can use mindfulness to deal with all of these difficult situations. So, we have a pandemic and we have civil unrest and there's huge economic challenges going on. And here in LA, they announced last week no going back to school in the fall, which is going to throw parents. I can't even imagine the chaos that's about to occur. And so I know this is an area that you focus on, and I just wondered what you could share with our audience about maybe a helpful way to deal with this.
Right. Wow. It is hard. I think for anyone who's listening, do not feel alone. This is difficult. A lot of people are struggling. I would probably say you and I, Teresa, are struggling in how we're working, in how our organizations, our industry has been disrupted, and it's not a 2 or 3 month challenge, which I think we all hoped for. It is much longer until a vaccine comes along, and even when we get a vaccine, because of a lot of folks who have strong feelings about anti, vaxxers, so to speak, it might continue on even further. But here's what I would say. It's really important to build a practice, a structure in your day to help you deal with the challenges. And we're going to talk about that in many different forms, but that's probably one of the biggest things I would say is we've lost some of our structure. Now, many of us work from home, but many of us don't have the commute to work. So we've lost that structure of, that delineation between work and home. And so what can we do to create that structure, those boundaries and those almost that bridge? And so I think that's a bit of a challenge. There's another way to look at this also, which is that this challenging time that we're in right now, these difficult situations we're facing, difficult conversations we need to have, difficult decisions we need to make, they're actually opportunities to transform ourselves. And so that may sound almost a little Pollyannish, but I really believe it. We're going to come out of this. The question is, are we going to come out of it in a way where we've grown some skills, some capabilities that we wouldn't otherwise have? And so to me, it is about, okay, how can we become students of human behavior? How can we understand how our brain works under pressure? How can we grow skills so we can better manage our brain and our behavior in these difficult moments, in these changing, disruptive times? And so there's a whole bunch of insights and a whole bunch of tools that are available for anyone to learn how to manage more effectively.
I agree with that. What would be a simple tool or technique that you could suggest that people practice to get
Yeah.
started?
Well, I would say walk every day. And so, this is obviously part of the podcast, the last 8% morning podcast, which, we're going to talk about, but essentially it is a walking mindfulness session. Um, for 24 years, I've been working with Olympic athletes or NFL, NBA teams, NASA, FBI, you know, Navy SEALs, all these groups under pressure. And so what we've done is we've taken this tool that used to be in a written form, almost like a diary. So you wake up and you do this as a way to focus for the day, and we've put it into an audio form so that, it's literally me in your ear. And so as opposed to getting up, this is what a lot of people do. We wake up and we pick up our phone and we look at our texts and news feeds and what's going on with, the president or whoever, right? And it spikes our cortisol. Cortisol is highest in the morning because we need it to get up and get going, but we don't need the excess cortisol that we get. So first thing, don't look at your phone first thing in the morning. Look at it, but not in the first 15, 20 minutes, half an hour. Your brain needs to wake up. Instead, go for a walk. That's the biggest thing I would say. Go for a 15-minute walk. That's what our podcast is all about. It's a morning routine that integrates three things: movement, going for a walk, mindfulness, and mental training exercises that we've used with these group for over 20 years. And helps you set the tone for the day, helps you set up your day. Some people struggle with mindfulness, of sitting, as you know, sitting mindfulness. My mind wanders and I don't know if I'm doing it right. And we find that one of the ways in is to walk. Now, there's a whole bunch of reasons why you want to walk anyway. We know that it turns on our internal pharmacy. Our muscles spit out myokines, goes to our brain, has three effects: makes us more stress resilient, makes us enjoy pleasure more, makes us more trusting of others. We can collaborate better. So those are three very, real effects we get just from walking moderately 15 to 20 minutes a day, which is fantastic. So you walk and you get that effect. You do mindfulness, you get that effect. You do some mental training exercises, and we actually use it as a form of drip learning, right? So in our company, we do training in emotional intelligence before and after, but mainly after our programs, people start getting engaged in the podcast where now they have drip learning. They have, like, in the 15 or 20 minutes, about 5 minutes is an idea of the day. And so they now have a new idea to kind of keep growing their learning. Because let's face it, the world is changing fast. We need to learn as fast as the world is changing. And so that would be the first and foremost thing that I would suggest, because it's actually a platform then to learn how to be more self-aware, to learn how to manage our emotions, to learn how to connect to others, to learn how to get into some habits of mind that help us respond versus react, which is, I know you're, kind of raison d'etre.
So I think that's great for multiple reasons. I agree. A lot of people struggle with sitting meditations. And so we encourage walking meditations, but I guess it's been a little challenging to think through how to do that in a podcast. So I commend you, because I really thought that was a novel way to approach it and to get people up and moving. And I think it also adds to that structure you're talking about, to get out of those habits you had before, the racing around, commuting to work. Now you need something to replace it. This is a beautiful thing to replace it with.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the structure, I mean, literally, this is my morning routine. I get up and I walk. And so it's like we're walking together. And we do follow a specific, as you know, specific BIG structure, acronym of two B's, two I's, two G's. And we pick, kind of one of the I, one of the G's. So, get up, you make your bed. That's really important when we're working from home. The second B is you pay attention to your belly and body mindfully as you walk. That's the B's. The I's is it's either an idea of the day or it's strengthening identity. Again, a big thing we do with athletes. And you don't need to be an athlete, by the way, to really get benefit from this. And then we choose one of the G's, either gratitude or goals. And so the idea, is that we go through and we have a real structure that helps us set the tone for the day. By the way, some people don't do it first thing in the morning. They do it. It's really interesting. They do their day, their morning of, they eat, they shower, they do whatever. And just before they go to work, they go for a 15-minute walk with this mindfulness, walking podcast as a way to kind of get into the day. And then they actually finish the day by doing the same thing, going for a walk. So it's almost replaced their commuting. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that is interesting. And I think that that's probably pretty effective, because that is part of, and we've focused a lot on this, is replacing, we can't, we don't like uncertainty. We love routine. All of that feels upended. And so to start looking at how do you replace things you can't do now with something you can that is actually probably better for you than what we were doing before. So I think that's wonderful. Now, I'm curious about how your podcast came about. And say again, it's the Last 8% Morning is the name
Correct.
of the podcast. Okay.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Yeah. So Last 8% Morning. Wow. I mean, like 24 years ago, we used this kind of written diary. It's called the Mindful Morning Notes, kind of a take on Julia Cameron's work, but really more focused on how do we set up the day with goals and gratitude and mindfulness. And, some people were saying, hey, I'm struggling right now. What can we do? And so 4 months ago, we decided, well, let's make this available to the public in a free form. And so, to be honest, we've never actually made this available kind of for free, but we thought this would be a great service to folks. And and the truth is, we've been experimenting with different iterations for like 24 years. But this one came about as, this kind of idea of drip learning. People are at home. And so we just experimented, started at 30 minutes, and then we found 15 to 20 minutes to be that sweet spot where kind of most people can do it. We've experimented with different structures, BIG structure is what we found to be the kind of most efficient, the best. It may iterate again. So it was really more just a response to what's going on with the virus. But as people, longtime listeners will tell you, it's so much more than just how to help you be more mindful or grow your emotional intelligence around the virus. Because, the last 8%, what that is so at the Institute for Health and Human Potential, ihhp.com, where I work, we survey over 40,000 people a month. And so from our research in the last 7 or 8 years, we find that most of us are pretty good at managing 85, 90, 92% of the different situations we face in the course of a day. But there are some situations, a tough conversation, a difficult decision, what we call the last 8%, where we struggle. And so that's where the whole idea came from, is that we struggle with some percentage of decisions or conversations we know we need to have. And why we struggle is because of emotions, because emotions get in the way. We either get fearful or we want to be perfect, and so we avoid. So we have a predictable default behavior. We either avoid or we make a mess. And it's emotions that are kind of behind that, either the fear driving avoid or anger or frustration driving the make a mess. And so the whole podcast is to help us manage these more difficult situations. And COVID is, coronavirus is one big last 8% situation, more effectively, more emotionally intelligently.
Great. Well, that's a great service to offer. We do the same thing. The podcast has really become focused on not so much, how to deal with the virus. It's about how to really look at all of the uncomfortable things that are coming up because we're at home for months, or we're suddenly
Right.
trapped with the same people for months, or how difficult things feel sometimes now, like going to the store feels more difficult. The simple things that we took for granted before. And I agree with you. I think that many people aren't aware that because willpower is not infinite each day,
Right.
we get drained over the day, or fatigue, or not taking care of ourselves, or all the different things that impact us. We frequently just kind of pull back instead of dealing with something that's going to be done and gone. And by pulling back, we have to keep dealing with it over and over and over again, which of course drains us even further. So I really like the last 8%. Let's get it out of the way. Let's fix it, or do it, or
Well,
at least
that's
look at it, right?
well, that's it. Because in our culture, as you know, Teresa, we have been taught, and it's become a habit, um, to when things aren't comfortable, change it, right? We don't feel good, change the temperature, turn on the air conditioning, turn on the heat, you know, change, eat if we're not feeling good, whatever. We're just so used to changing. And our approach, and I'm sure yours is as well, which is to, no, let's actually sit with it, right? When we have a strong emotion or a strong physical sensation or that voice in our head, many of us go to change it. And so we get into, aversion and avoidance, or we get hooked and we make a mess. And so our point is, no, what we resist persists. So instead, just experience it. And this is the big thing we find with Olympic athletes, is that as soon as they start to push that feeling of pressure away, it actually becomes bigger and they get overwhelmed by it. Instead, we say befriend it, welcome it in. When you're not feeling comfortable, welcome it, explore it with curiosity. And of course, what happens, it loses its power. And all of a sudden now we are more able to deal with ever more difficult situations and physical sensations and emotions. And this gives us power.
Absolutely. And I think it also really addresses one of the biggest problems right now, which is feeling out of control. So if you can look at the difficult things and really, like you said, befriend it. I use the term neutral observer, that you just step back and just look at it. You start to see, oh, it's not that powerful, and I do have some control. And I think psychologically, that's imperative for people right now to get to get those things that they can control in the forefront to help relieve that anxiety over the things they can't control. So
Yeah. And that's why I'm actually hopeful that this time with the virus is opening people up to mindfulness in a way that maybe, I mean, and it's really been on the rise. You know, I studied 30 years ago with John Kabat-Zinn and at the University of Massachusetts, and, you know, spent time in monasteries, but everyone thought it was wacko back then. And, you know, as you know, people now are more open to it. And I think that's great. I think that's going to be helpful for all of us. By the way, just the idea of control what you can control, that's one of the reasons working with the US Navy and Army, that's why you make your bed in the morning, because it's something you can't control. It builds a bit of momentum. And then when you come back at the end of the day, in a day that you might not have had a lot of control, you come back to a made bed, something that was kind of controlled, and you feel internally a bit better. So it's a very small hack, but it's very powerful. And so I think I want to challenge everyone who's listening. Experiment. What can you do to put yourself in the best place so you can be your best during these difficult moments, difficult situations, conversations, decisions, whatever it is you're facing?
yeah, it's really interesting because one of the things we teach people in changing habits is to work on keystone habits, and making your bed happens to be a keystone habit that studies show actually make you more productive. So I think that's a big plus when you're working from home, because so many people are struggling to stay productive because it's easy to get distracted when you're at home alone. So
Oh,
that's really interesting. I didn't think
it's,
about it from the control point.
yeah, no, it's so true. Plus the other thing is, like, you know, I'm looking at my bed right now. If it was unmade all day, you know, that kind of is not great for the mind. We know that as well. So it's kind of interesting. It all kind of comes together, doesn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think now that the virus is surging again in so many places, that it's a good time for people to maybe step back and reassess. Because I think, like you said, at the beginning, we thought it might be a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, and it's clearly going to be at least another year or longer. So now is the time to step back and say, okay, well, I got through that first round, if we want to call it that. And now I really need to get maybe a little more, pay more attention to how can I make this more comfortable and more productive and more structured, whether you live alone or whether you have family, or especially now if you have kids that are going to be remote learning for a much longer period. And so I
Right.
really appreciate your wisdom in these tips and tricks, because that's really a lot of what it comes down to. You know, make your bed. That's a simple, easy, like I think of it almost like a trick. You're tricking your brain
Yes.
into shifting what it's focusing on. And those things do not take a lot of time, and they don't take
No.
a huge amount of effort, but they will absolutely improve the quality of your life right now.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I think it also brings up the point that we are walking models for the young people and the people in our lives. And we're around them way more. And, you know, as I like to say to, you know, parents, don't worry that your child doesn't always listen to you. Worry that they're constantly watching you. And so I think it's important for us to really think about, what are we modeling for our young people? And to me, you know, I feel like right now it's an opportunity for us to have a big influence on them in terms of our modeling.
Yeah, I think that that's really very profound, because a lot of people forget that children are always watching. and, and
Yes.
and not just children, even young adults. You know, there's a problem now with young adults, at least in the United States, with feeling invincible to getting sick, and so they're not necessarily taking precautions. And I think the more we can model and maybe shift away from, being angry or judging or
Right.
shaming or whatever we're trying to do, but just model the behavior, show them over and over again, no, this is serious and we're all doing this and none of us like it,
Yeah.
but it is an opportunity to really spend time looking inward at a time.
Mhm.
How often do we have this opportunity? you know
It's true.
we're rushing and racing normally all day long. I'm amazed at the difference in my quality of life just over the last 4 months. I just told my staff this morning, I couldn't quite identify sort of this odd feeling. And, anytime I have feelings, of course, I spend time trying to really explore. And it suddenly dawned on me, it was like, life is easier. It's
Yeah.
such a shock to think it's actually easier. Like, what a weird concept. Harder
Yeah.
in some ways, obviously, but the day to day is easier. It's very contained, right? Instead of being
It's
all over the
true.
county, I'm in a 1,200 square foot space. So it's
Yeah.
easier.
Yeah. It's a great point. Um, I would say this as well. One of the things that we picked up on when we did some interviews with some of our podcast listeners of the last 8% morning is that they're struggling with certain things. And so we actually create a certain week. So we have an anxiety week, we have an empathy week. And like you say, I want to suggest to everyone, go out and explore. This is the golden age of learning right now. There's so much available, podcasts and videos. Go out and learn the stuff that you want to grow, but also teach and model for your young people. So, like you say, it's a bit simpler. We're not commuting. We actually, in some ways, have a bit more time. By the way, we have to also be careful that we're not overworking and burning out.
Right.
That's one of the things I think, when we wake up and we look at our phone and we don't have a real prescribed way to get our brain started for the day, that's what can lead to burnout. And so be careful, everyone who's listening, that you're not feeling guilty. Oh, I should be working more, because we have less distractions. We're not going out as much. And it's easy just to kind of keep working away. And, that's not great for our well-being. And I have to say, Teresa, my biggest fear, I've got many big fears around what's going on, but it's on the mental health side. That, like, I think people really are struggling, and where they could distract before, now they can't, and so it's making it even harder, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And on top of that, there's so many families under such real pressure because they've
Yeah.
lost their jobs or they're
Right.
on hiatus or whatever you want to call it. And there's no certainty, like it's already happened here in LA. They got to go back for a few weeks and now they're probably getting pulled back. And that kind of pressure, I think, especially if you're isolated or your family's depending on you or whatever it is, absolutely is magnified. We've been trying to encourage people to use telehealth services for mental
Mm,
health because
right.
a lot of people are afraid to go to to an
Of
office, but
course. Yeah.
to talk to someone. Of course, if you have someone in your family or friends that you can talk to, that's great. But I think for a lot of people, it's a very fine line between feeling sad, disappointed, the range of emotions we're all feeling changes every day, to sort of slipping into what could be really depression. And under the
Right.
circumstances, it's becoming more and more common, and it's all age groups. There's not one age group now affected. So
That's a
I
great
very
point.
much agree with you with that people really need to check in. I mean, that's the easiest way to know, is to practice mindfulness, where you really can check in without judging yourself and just
Yes.
say, am I still okay? Or maybe I do need to just maybe check on getting a little bit of help, just in
Yeah.
case, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. And as I know your listeners are quite aware, but this whole idea of being non-judgmental is, I think, really one of the, I don't know if people recognize how powerful it is as an antidote, both being non-judgmental and accepting. I think those two pieces, that we have to accept those things that right now we can't control. We find that hard. We're so used to take charge, be in control, don't accept, always strive for something better. And by the way, look, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a writer. I'm a speaker. I want to grow. I want to control things, but there is a real wisdom around understanding there's some things I just have to accept, like the natural flow of joy and sorrow that is this life. That's what it is. And so, can we accept it? Can we be at peace with it? That's the work. I think that's actually as much the work, because at the end of the day, there's just going to be some stuff that we cannot control. And so then it's okay, how can we be agile individually as organizations to kind of manage and adapt to what's coming at us? Because if we can't, then then we're going to suffer more, and there's a lot of suffering right now, for sure.
There is. And I do think it's really important. And it's something that's really hard for people to get at first. I know from doing workshops, like the beginning of the workshop, they do not get it. And by the end, hopefully most of them do, but it's that we have a choice.
Right.
And most people think life happens to them and they don't have a choice of what's happening. And actually just doing that mind shift of understanding that, yep, that happened. It
Yes.
happened. It's done. There's nothing I can do about that. I can
Yeah.
now choose how I want to respond to that. I think it's critical to our well-being.
It is. It is. And it really brings this idea of, you know, it's not my emotions, it's the emotions. And that's a hard one. Like, so this might be a level that's harder for folks to get. But if we can see that we're almost a container holding on to emotions that come and go, they will pass. And can we just watch them? As you said, the neutral observer. Do you call it neutral observer? Is that what you call it? Yeah.
Yeah,
And so, the idea, if we can be, a witness and watch it without attaching, wow, that is really powerful.
it's extremely powerful. And we'll keep trying. We'll keep trying to get it out there and help people learn it so that they don't have to suffer. I just came across the Buddhist saying about the formula: pain times resistance equals suffering.
Yeah.
And I had forgotten about that. We learn so much. And I was like, oh, that's so profound right now. So the pain, you don't have a choice. That's part of life. Pain is part of life. But the suffering is optional. And to
Mhm.
get people to understand there's a piece here you don't have to carry.
That's
It,
it.
you can just accept that it is what it is. And yeah, it's uncomfortable or it's painful, but it's once you start looking at it, like you said, it actually starts to dissipate. So there's no
Yeah.
need to continue suffering. And we don't want anyone to suffer, but times are challenging, so we'll all try to get the word out there so they don't have to.
Yeah. What's interesting is with the work we do with, folks in organizations or these, NFL, NBA teams, they've come to recognize that resistance to fighting whatever is in the moment doesn't help their performance, doesn't help them function as a team. So it's kind of interesting how more groups now are recognizing it's not some soft, squishy, you know, Volvo driving, NPR listening kind of, habit. It's actually a science-based approach to responding more effectively to what's in front of us. And everyone is dealing with something in front of them. That's the big thing I want everyone to really get. Don't feel alone, right? There's this term in psychology called terminal uniqueness, where we terminally think we're the only one experiencing something. That's absolutely not the case. We are all experiencing. And and by knowing that, all of a sudden we feel a little less alone. And that can be powerful.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the, if you want to call it an upside to all of this, is that this is the first time in my life, and maybe not for everyone, but it's the first time in my life I can think of that we can see it on the biggest scale. Everyone around the globe is going through something similar at the same time. And that really speaks to our connectedness. This is an opportunity, again, to realize we're all in the same boat, which I don't think that's ever happened in my life before. And everyone's coping with it differently, perhaps, but we're still
Right.
all facing the same challenges. So, and then the second part of it is mindfulness has exploded, the interest in it. I've never seen anything like it in all the years that I've practiced. It's like you said, it's for a long time been sort of this, and despite all of the scientific studies, it's
Yeah.
still been kind of off to the side, like, oh, that's those, those woo-woo people. And
Yes.
now, just by continuously, I mean, I know all of my peers in this field, we're all doing the same thing, repeating over and over again. It's evidence-based, it's scientific. You
Right.
can look it
Right.
up. I promise you, it's not it's not some strange ritual. This is something that's exercise for the mind that
Yes.
gives you back that control. So, I'm always looking for an upside to things. And to me, that out of a global pandemic and now the civil unrest, that is the upside. If more people really just learn how to practice these simple practices, it's not hard, but they'll start to see the benefits, and then that will serve them forever. So the pandemic's going to pass. I don't know what will happen with the civil unrest. I mean, I'm not psychic or anything, but all of this may go on for a while, but eventually things will settle down. And then everyone will have this great new understanding. I mean, I think of it, it's a way of being, but it is a collection of tools and techniques that strengthen that way of being. And I think it'll serve them then the rest of their lives.
Here, here. Absolutely agree.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And again, the name of the podcast is Last 8% Morning.
Yep.
And then you also have a book, Performing Under Pressure.
Yes.
And so I want to make sure I get that out there, because that sounds like it is something that could also be very beneficial to improving the human potential. And I wish you well and hope you stay safe. And thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks, Teresa. I want to wish all the listeners not good luck, actually. I don't want to wish you good luck. I don't necessarily believe in luck. After looking at all the data that I look at, instead, I want to wish you two things: not good luck, but good preparation, which is what listening to this podcast is all about. So not good luck, but good preparation and good courage. So when you do face your last 8% situation, conversation, you don't avoid it. You don't make a mess. You find that middle way of, dealing with it in a way where they can hear you, making the decision even though it's uncomfortable. So good preparation and good courage. It's been my pleasure, Teresa, to be on the show.
Thank you so much.